Hey everybody, bringing you another video. This one's on Abraham and some cool scriptures relating to Abraham, but also an account of Abraham and some of his deeds that we get from the Book of Jasher that I hope you enjoy, that many of you probably have not heard. Abraham truly was a man of God with an eye single to God's glory. Joseph Smith said of Abraham, Abraham was guided in all his family affairs by the Lord, was conversed with by angels, and by the Lord was told where to go and when to stop, and prospered exceedingly in all that he put his hand unto. It was because he and his family obeyed the counsel of the Lord. In Hebrews 11 we read, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, in a strange country, dwelling in the tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob and the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Abraham, just as the other prophets, Isaac and Jacob, those who are at the head of Israel and this great nation that God would bless, looked for this great place, the city of God, which is promised to come forth in these last days. What a rich blessing we have to look forward to, that Abraham himself looked forward to. Let's get into the unknown story of Abraham. Hopefully this will inspire us to be more diligent and also have great courage and faith like Abraham. The Book of Jasher, this story might not be true. The apocryphal books aren't necessarily true, but I have very partiality to this story. Even if it isn't true, I really wish it was true, and if it is true, then I'm really glad it's out there for us to receive. So take it with a grain of salt, but I feel like it teaches a message that is beneficial either way. And when Abram came out from the cave, he went to Noah and his son Shem, and he remained with them to learn the instruction of the Lord and his ways. And no man knew where Abram was, and Abram served Noah and Shem his son for a long time. Now this verse, just to give a little background story, Abraham was the son of Terah, and Terah was one of King Nimrod's servants and advisors, and he was eating and celebrating the birth of his son with other of the king's advisors and sorcerers, and that kind of ilk. And the sorcerers or magicians came out of the house that night and saw a sign in the heavens which they interpreted as Abram, who would become Abraham, would one day overthrow his people, his children would overthrow Nimrod and Nimrod's kingdom, which is very prophetic, because Abraham's posterity will overthrow Babylon, which is, Nimrod is he founded Babel. He is Babylon, the early form of Babylon. And so that's the backstory, is that because of the magicians, sorcerers, whatever we would call them, I think magicians is more of the term, saw this sign in the heavens, they went and told Nimrod. Nimrod required Terah to bring Abraham to him so that he could kill Abraham, or Abram. And so Terah brought another child of the same age from a son of one of his servants, and the and told King Nimrod that it was Abram, and that child was destroyed. And King Nimrod said, well, that's done and over with. But really, Terah had sent Abram away, and he ended up learning from Noah and Shem and living with them. So that was the background story. And in verse 6 we read, and Abram was in Noah's house 39 years, and Abram knew the Lord from 3 years old, and he went in the ways of the Lord until the day of his death, as Noah and his son Shem had taught him. And all the sons of the earth in those days greatly transgressed against the Lord, and they rebelled against him, and they served other gods, and they forgot the Lord who had created them in the earth. And the inhabitants of the earth made unto themselves at that time every man his god, gods of wood and stone, which could neither speak, hear, nor deliver. And the sons of men served them, and they became their gods. And Terah, who was Abram's father, had 12 gods of large size, made of wood and stone after the 12 months of the year, and he served each one monthly. And every month Terah would bring his meat offering and drink offering to his gods. Thus did Terah all the days. And all that generation were wicked in the sight of the Lord, and they thus made every man his god, but they forsook the Lord who had created them. And there was not a man found in those days in the whole earth who knew the Lord, for they served each man his own god, each except Noah and his household, and all those who were under his counsel knew the Lord in those days. We'll pick up the story in chapter 11 of Jasher. And Abram knew the Lord, and he went in his ways and instructions, and the Lord his God was with him. And Terah his father was in those days still captain of the host of King Nimrod, and he still followed strange gods. And Abram came to his father's house, and saw 12 gods standing there in their temples. And the anger of Abram was kindled when he saw these images in his father's house. And Abram said, as the Lord liveth, these images shall not remain in my father's house. So shall the Lord who created me do unto me, if in 3 days' time I do not break them all. And Abram went forth from them, and his anger burned within him. And Abram hastened and went from the chamber to his father's outer court. And he found his father sitting in the court, and all his servants with him. And Abram came and sat before him. And Abram asked his father, saying, Father, tell me, where is God who created heaven and earth, and all the sons of men upon the earth? And who created thee and me? And Terah answered his son Abram and said, Behold, those who created us are all with us in the house. And Abram said to his father, My Lord, show me them to me, I pray thee. And Terah brought Abram into the chamber of the inner court, and Abram saw, and behold, the whole room was full of gods of wood and stone, 12 great images, and others less than they without number. And Terah said to his son, Behold, these are they which made all thou seest upon the earth, and which created me and thee and all mankind. And Terah bowed down to his gods, and he then went away from them, and Abram his son went away with him. And when Abram had gone forth from them, he went to his mother and sat before her, and said to his mother, Behold, my father has shown me those who made heaven and earth, and all the sons of men. Now, therefore, hasten and fetch a kid from the flock, and make it savory meat, that I may bring it to my father's gods as an offering for them to eat. Perhaps I may thereby become acceptable to them. To To give you some further background on the story, Abraham gives this offering to the gods and they do nothing. And he knows this, but he's doing it to prove a point. And we'll continue. And he called out and said, Woe unto my father and this wicked generation, whose hearts are inclined to vanity, who serve these idols of wood and stone, which can neither eat, smell, hear, nor speak, who have mouths without speech, eyes without sight, ears without hearing, hands without feeling, and legs which cannot move. Like them are those that made them, and that trust in them. And when Abram saw all these things, his anger was kindled against his father, and he hastened and took a hatchet in his hand, and came unto the chamber of the gods, and he broke all his father's gods. And when he had done breaking the images, he placed the hatchet in the hand of the great God, which was there before them. And he went out, and Terah his father came home, and for he had heard at the door the sound of the striking of the hatchet. So Terah came into the house to know what this was about. And Terah, having heard the noise of the hatchet in the room of images, ran to the to the images, and he met Abram going out. And Terah entered the room and found all the idols fallen down and broken, and the hatchet in the hand of the largest, which was not broken, and the savory meat which Abram his son had made was still before them. And when Terah saw this, his anger was greatly kindled, and he hastened and went from the room to Abram, and he found Abram his son still sitting in the house. And he said to him, What is this work thou hast done to my gods? And Abram answered Terah his father, and he said, Not so, my lord, for I brought savory meat before them, and when I came nigh to them with the meat, that they might eat, they all at once stretched forth their hands to eat before the great one had put forth his hand to eat. And the large one saw their works that they did before him, and his anger was violently kindled against them. And he went and took the hatchet that was in the house, and came to them, and broke them all. And behold, the hatchet is yet in his hand, as thou seest. And Terah's anger was kindled against his son Abram when he spoke this. And Terah said to Abram his son in his anger, What is this tale thou hast told me? Thou speakest lies to me. Is there in these gods spirit, soul, or power to do all thou hast told me? Are they not wood and stone, and have I not myself made them? And canst thou speak such lies, saying that the large God that was with them smote them? It is thou that didst place the hatchet in his hands, and then sayest he smote them all. And Abram answered his father and said to him, And how canst thou then serve these idols, in whom there is no power to do anything? Can those idols in which thou trustest deliver thee? Can they hear thy prayers when thou callest upon them? Can they deliver thee from the hands of thy enemies? Or will they fight thy battles for thee against thy enemies, and thou shouldest serve wood and stone, which can neither speak nor hear? And now surely it is not good for thee, nor for the sons of men that are connected with thee, to do these things. Are you so silly, so foolish, or so short of understanding, that you will serve wood and stone, and do after this manner, and forget the Lord God who made heaven and earth, and who created you in the earth, and thereby bring a great evil upon your souls in this matter, by serving stone and wood? Did not our fathers in the days of old sin in this manner, and the Lord God of the universe brought the waters of the flood upon them, and destroyed the whole earth. And how can you continue to do this, and serve gods of wood and stone, who cannot hear or speak or deliver you from oppression, thereby bringing down the anger of God of the universe upon you? And now therefore, my father, refrain from this, and bring not evil upon thy soul and the souls of thy household. And Abram hastened and sprang from before his father, and took the hatchet from his father's largest idol, with which Abram broke it, and ran away. And Terah, seeing all that Abram had done, hastened to go from his house, and he went to the king, and came before Nimrod, and stood before him. And he bowed down to the king. And the king said, What dost thou want? And he said, I beseech thee, my lord, to hear me. Now 50 years back a child was born to me, and thus has he done to my gods, and thus has he spoken. And now therefore, my lord and king, send for him, that he may come before thee, and judge him according to the law, that we may be delivered from his evil. And the king sent 3 men of his servants, and they went and brought Abram before the king. And Nimrod and all his princes and servants were that day sitting before him, and Terah sat also before them. And the king said to Abram, What is this that thou hast done to thy father and to his gods? And Abram answered the king in the words that he spoke to his father. And he said, The large God that was with them in the house did to them what thou hast heard. And the king said to Abram, Had they power to speak, and to eat, and to do as thou hast said? And Abram answered the king, saying, And if they be no power in them, why dost thou serve them, and cause the sons of men to err through thy follies? Dost thou imagine that they can deliver thee, or do anything small or great, that thou shouldest serve them? And why wilt thou not sense the God of the whole universe, who created thee, and in whose power it is to kill and keep alive? Foolish, simple, and ignorant king, woe unto thee forever. I thought thou wouldest teach thy servants the upright way, but thou hast not done this, but hast filled the whole earth with thy sins, and the sins of thy people who have followed thy ways. Dost thou not know, or hast thou not heard, that this evil which thou doest, our ancestors sinned therein in the days of old, and the eternal God brought the waters of the flood upon them, and destroyed them all, and also destroyed the whole earth on their account? And wilt thou thy people rise up now, and do like unto this work, in order to bring down the anger of the Lord God of the universe, and to bring evil upon thee and the whole earth? And now therefore put away this evil deed which thou hast done, and serve the God of the universe, as thy soul is in his hands, and then it will be well with thee. And if thy wicked heart will not hearken to my words, to cause thee to forsake thy evil ways, and to serve the eternal God, then wilt thou die in shame in the latter days, thou and thy people, and all who are connected with thee, hearing thy words or walking in thy evil ways. And when Abram had ceased speaking before the king and princes, Abram lifted up his eyes to the heavens, and he said, The Lord seeth all the wicked, and he will judge them. This is Book of Jasher, chapter 12. We'll pick up with verse 3. And the king said to the princes and sages, Have you heard what Abram, the son of Terah, has done to his father? Thus has he done to him, and I ordered him to be brought before me. And thus has he spoken. His heart did not misgive him, neither did he stir in my presence. And behold, now he is confined in the prison. And therefore decide what judgment is due to this man who reviled the king, who spoke and did all the things thou that you heard. And they all answered the king, saying, The man who revileth the king should be hanged upon a tree. But having done all the things he said, and having despised our gods, he must therefore be burned to death. For this is the law in this matter. And the king's servants took Abram and his brother, and they stripped them of all their clothes, excepting their lower garments which were upon them. And they bound their hands and feet with linen cords. And the servants of the king lifted them up, and cast them both into the furnace. And the Lord loved Abram, and he had compassion over him. And the Lord came down and delivered Abram from the fire, and he was not burned. But all the cords with which they were bound, which bound him, were burned, while Abram remained and walked about in the fire. And Haran died when they had cast him into the fire, and he was burned to ashes, for his heart was not perfect with the Lord. And those men who cast him into the fire, the flame of the fire spread over them, and they were burned, and 12 men of them died. And Abram walked in the midst of the fire 3 days and 3 nights. And all the servants of the king saw him walking in the fire, and they came and told the king, saying, Behold, we have seen Abram walking about in the midst of the fire, and even the lower garments which are upon him are not burned, but the cord with which he was bound is burned. And when the king saw that his servants could not approach the fire, lest they should be burned, the king called to Abram, O servant of God, of the God who is in heaven, go forth from amidst the fire, and come hither before me. And Abram hearkened to the voice of the king, and he went forth from the fire, and he came and stood before the king. And when Abram came out, the king and all his servants saw Abram coming before the king with his lower garments upon him, for they were not burned, but the cord with which he was bound was burned. And the king said to Abram, How is it that thou wast not burned in the fire? And Abram said to the king, The God of heaven and earth, in whom I trust, and who has all in his power, he delivered me from the fire into which thou didst cast me. And Abram said to them, Do not bow down to me, but bow down to the God of the world, who made you, and serve him, and go in his ways, for it is he who delivered me from out of this fire, and it is he who created the souls and the spirits of all men, and formed man in his mother's womb, and brought him forth into the world, and it is he who will deliver those who trust in him from all pain. And Abram went forth from the king in peace, and many of the king's servants followed him, and about 300 men joined him. I hope you enjoyed this story. It was an amazing story that I had not heard before from the Book of Jasher. And you can get more details by looking up the Book of Jasher and reading it. Hope you enjoyed.